In 1884, the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions made a national...
Wait a second, that's not the right video. This is economics, not US history. But what if, and I'm just spitballing here, what if we thought about how economic principles can be used to help explain the working conditions of the late 1800s and early 1900s, as well as the rationale behind labor unions and their strategies? I mean, if business decisions are driven by things like demand, supply, and competition, workers' decisions might be as well. Maybe we can figure out what this time period means for our world over a century later. By the end of today's lesson, you should be able to answer the following questions. How did the profit motive shape relations between business owners and workers? What economic forces created conflict between business owners and workers? What were some of the long-term impacts of the labor movement on the American economy? You should also start thinking about our big picture question. How can the labor movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries help us better understand the workplace of the 21st century? Now, you probably remember from world history and US history that the Industrial Revolution unleashed an era of massive economic growth in the United States and Europe. You probably remember the stories of workers toiling for long hours and little money. I bet you can't shake the tales of unsafe working conditions and child labor. But you've probably also wondered, why was it this way? After all, it's hard to imagine why anyone would be okay with this situation. And while it may feel good to try to think about this history in terms of heroes and villains, you should think about how different systems and forces created the conditions for this to take place. Just like today, business owners during this period wanted to turn a profit. That meant maximizing revenue and controlling costs. What was one of those costs? Labor. Labor is a term used to define the collective employees in a business or industry. But the workers were just as eager to profit off their work. What does profit look like for the workers? It meant making more money, receiving better benefits, working fewer hours, and having safer working conditions. So how were business owners during the 19th and early 20th centuries able to get away with paying workers less money, requiring longer hours, and maintaining unsafe working conditions in order to increase their profit margins? Well, increasing industrialization meant that there was a high demand for workers in factory jobs. But at the same time, this was also a period with increasing urbanization. More people were moving to cities looking for jobs just to survive. This constant supply of new workers meant that business owners had the advantage. You think that you should earn more than $1 a day? Well, there are dozens of people behind you willing to work more hours for 75 cents a day. The fact that asking for a raise or trying to profit a little more from your work could make you lose your job meant that business owners had the power to keep wages low. It also meant that people complaining about working conditions were easily replaced. Let's take a second to check in. Your friend is upset after asking her boss for a raise. Her boss pointed to a stack of applications and said, "These people want a job and are willing to work for less." How can you use economic concepts and historical examples to explain the situation? From our position over a century later, it's easy to wonder what was so controversial about paying workers a living wage, giving them time off, and providing a safe working environment. But for owners at the time, these demands felt like a fundamental threat to the profitability of their businesses. Any increase in costs, like higher wages and making factories safer, would force businesses to choose between raising prices or reducing their profit margin. For the vast majority of producers at this time, markets were extremely competitive. Increases in prices could lead to a change in quantity demanded for their product, as customers sought less expensive options. For entrepreneurs, there was little financial incentive to be the first business owner to raise wages and increase workplace safety. This meant that in order for any changes to take place, workers needed to show they were willing to disrupt business operations to get owners to raise pay, reduce hours, and make work safer. For labor organizers, the key to achieving this was organization and cooperation among workers. Labor unions were key to this organization and cooperation. A labor union is an organization made up of workers that seeks to protect wages, working conditions, and benefits for employees in a business. Union leaders realized that while it might be easy for businesses to replace a few workers at a time, any sort of coordinated action by a large number of employees could have a significant impact. Why? Because it had the potential to impact a business's profitability. Remember, profit is calculated by subtracting costs from revenue, and in order to have revenue, a company has to be able to sell a good or service. And in order to produce those goods and services, a business needs access to resources, and labor is one of those key resources. Tactics like strikes, work slowdowns, and product boycotts were all used by unions to impact a business's ability to generate revenue. The ultimate goal was to get businesses to sit down and negotiate with unions to create a working environment that allowed businesses to remain profitable while workers were paid well and kept safe. The reality was that during the industrial age, business owners' fear of financial disaster and labor's push for action often created an environment of distrust and hostility between the two groups. This distrust and hostility often led to the conflict so often discussed in history classes. Okay, let's take a second to think about this a little further. Employees at a business are upset about pay and working conditions. They're talking about forming a union. How could a union help them improve working conditions? Why might the owners be opposed to the workers unionizing? Remember how I said earlier we shouldn't think about this in terms of heroes and villains? Well, that's because businesses and labor unions are both integral parts of an economy. Entrepreneurs taking the risk to create the goods and services consumers want and need is essential. And having labor unions ensuring workers have decent wages and safe working conditions is just as important. In fact, having both sides respect the role of the other is beneficial for an economy. The 3 decades after World War II are considered a golden age of labor unions, and it was a period of amazing economic growth. And while there were lots of factors that helped fuel this growth, improved relationships between businesses and labor unions definitely helped. But how could paying workers more benefit both workers and businesses? Remember that we defined demand as the desire for a good or service and the ability to pay for it. What do you think happened to demand once workers had more money and more time to spend it? That's right, demand in the economy increased. Those workers who were barely getting by before were now suddenly a whole new group of consumers. Workers with more money purchasing more goods, creating more jobs, which meant more workers with more money purchasing more goods, creating more jobs. For businesses, there might have been higher labor costs, but that was offset by massive amounts of new revenue as more people were able to buy the goods and services these companies produced. Okay, time for our last check-in. Businesses and unions are often portrayed as opponents who share nothing in common. Why is the reality more complicated than that portrayal? Let's take a moment to recap. During the industrial era, the increasing number of people moving to cities looking for jobs in the factories opening there allowed businesses to keep wages low, require long working hours, and ignore workplace safety. Unions began to organize workers to fight for better pay, shorter hours, and safer working conditions. Recognizing the importance of profit to business owners, these unions used collective bargaining and strikes to secure these gains for workers. And while businesses were resistant to the changes unions advocated for, these created economic conditions that benefited both workers and businesses. While labor unions experienced a golden age after World War II, the past several decades have been challenging. Tomorrow, we'll examine some of the challenges unions face in the 21st century. But until then, keep investing in yourself, one lesson at a time. See you next time.
Hey!